All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at an absolutely epic, internet breaking culinary stunt. Now, if you're familiar with Indian cuisine, you already know the aloo paratha. It's a simple, much loved household staple, basically a delicious flatbread stuffed with spiced potatoes. But what happens when a dedicated team of creators decides to take this everyday comforting dish and scale it up to engineer the world's biggest aloo paratha? Well, we're talking about transforming a cozy breakfast item into a massive, heavy lifting challenge. To really put the absolute madness of this into perspective, just think about the number 25. That's 25 kilograms, or, over 55 pounds. And the wildest part of that is the combined weight of just the base ingredients. Literally just the potatoes and the flour for a single flatbread. So right out of the gate, you can see the team isn't just like cooking a meal here. They're operating at an industrial scale, turning a standard kitchen recipe into this wild physical stunt.
Section 1, Mountains of Ingredients. Scaling up a classic household staple. When you scale a classic dish up to this extreme, the whole preparation phase changes completely. Looking at the foundation of the dish, we're dealing with a massive 15 kilos of flour and 10 kilos of potatoes. Just think about the sheer logistics of that. The team had to wash, boil, manually peel, and grate 10 entire kilos of potatoes. And meanwhile, someone else is taking on the back-breaking task of kneading 15 kilos of flour into the perfect dough. They actually had to warn each other, don't make the dough too wet because otherwise, the sheer weight of this giant paratha would just cause it to completely fall apart later. And all of this brilliantly highlights the flavor profile they were building. Look at this massive masala mix. You've got your salt, fresh coriander, turmeric, coriander powder, red chili powder, green chilies, and oil. But notice the karam seeds, or ajwain, in there. That's a super traditional addition specifically meant to aid in digestion, which, let's be real, considering the immense size of this meal, is absolutely a necessity. Another thing the team emphasized was the onions. When you're making a paratha this huge, the onions and green chilies must be chopped incredibly fine, because if the cuts are too big, the mixture kind of just turns into a vegetable stir-fry, and it'll actually tear the dough apart when they try to roll it out. But honestly, mixing huge quantities of spices by hand is bound to lead to some chaotic, collaborative fun. There's this great quote from the source material where someone yells, "What are you doing, making coriander ladoos? Put it in properly." Now, a ladoo is a round Indian sweet, and one of the guys was dumping so much coriander powder into the mix that it literally looked like they were baking sweets instead of flatbread. It's just a fun little reminder that behind all this massive, stressful challenge is really just a group of friends having a blast and making a giant mess. Section 2, a unique mixing method, solving the stuffing problem. This brings us to the very first major complication of the challenge. How exactly do you manage the dough for something this massive? Usually, for a normal paratha, you take a small ball of dough, make a little pocket, and neatly stuff the spiced potato masala inside before rolling it out. But for a giant paratha, stuffing a 15-kilo dough ball with 10 kilos of potatoes is, well, physically impossible. It would tear instantly under its own weight. So their giant scale hack was to completely rethink the architecture of the dish. They mixed the raw dough directly into the massive pile of potato filling to create one single unified base. The really crucial takeaway here is that mixing the dough directly into the masala entirely prevents the giant paratha from breaking. By kneading the flour, water, and spiced potatoes into one homogeneous mixture, they got rid of the weak points where a traditional stuffed paratha would normally rupture. Plus, as a bonus, it guarantees that every single square inch of this massive flatbread has a perfectly even spread of that delicious, spicy potato flavor. Moving right along to Section 3, the ultimate baking challenge. How do you cook something you can't flip? We've reached the absolute climax of this explainer. The dough is mixed, it's been rolled out into a giant pan using a massive, custom-built rolling pin. But here is the multi-million-dollar question. How on earth do you cook a 25-kilo flatbread when it is way too heavy to flip over? Well, the team's engineering solution is nothing short of brilliant. Step 1. Before the dough even touches the metal, heavily oil that giant pan. Without it, the dough would stick, tear, and instantly burn. Step 2 is where the real magic happens. Since they can't flip it, they baked the top side first. They covered the pan with this massive metal lid and piled burning hot coals directly on top of it, basically turning the pan into a giant outdoor oven. Then, step 3. Once the top was baked, they took off the lid, added butter, made deep cuts into the dough so the heat could penetrate, and slowly baked the bottom over an elevated open fire. I will say this final step was incredibly tense. As one of the team members warned, if it's too close to the fire, the paratha will completely burn to coal. They had to carefully, meticulously manage the exact distance between their giant custom pan and the roaring flames beneath it. Literally one wrong move or one sudden temperature spike and hours of exhausting physical labor would go up in smoke. And to really grasp the sheer endurance required for this, let's just track the timeline for a second. This was not a quick kitchen experiment. They started in the morning, boiling and grating those 10 kilograms of potatoes. By midday, they were wrestling with the giant dough and trying to roll it out. And it wasn't until the evening that they finally got to that delicate, high-stakes baking process. It literally took a whole team working from sunrise to sunset to pull this off. Finally, Section 4, the grand taste test. Was the massive effort actually worth it? As the evening set in and the heat died down, they finally sliced into their masterpiece. And here's the final verdict. Despite all their very real fears about burning it or leaving it raw in the middle, it was a complete triumph. The top was perfectly baked from the coal lid, and the bottom achieved that highly desired kadak, or perfectly crispy, texture from the open fire. The heat penetrated all the way through those cuts they made, so it cooked evenly throughout. And of course, you can't have a giant paratha without the classic companions. They served it up with large quantities of traditional pickle, sauce, and fresh yogurt. Honestly, it's just amazing what human ingenuity, teamwork, and a whole lot of potatoes and flour can achieve when pushed to the absolute limit. It took an entire team working from morning to evening to conquer this crispy giant. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Considering the sheer scale and deliciousness of this undertaking, would you be able to finish such a big paratha? Or, better yet, what ordinary dish would you want to see scaled up to world record sizes next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next deep dive.